Hello, guys. Welcome back. Did you miss us? Because we missed you. Welcome back, Bright Lights Beyonders, for our second solo episode of the season. Just me, just Lexie, just your co host. And I am so excited. If you are watching on video, you know what day it is, what holiday we're celebrating. If you're not watching on video, which we highly recommend because it gives you the full picture, but if you're not, Lexi, can you kind of describe the aura, the essence of this video for our listeners?
Okay, picture this, listeners. Andy's in a room. Her background, pink. Picture this, listener. I'm in a room. My background, pink. Andy wearing a headband with little sweethearts on it. Me wearing a headband with hearts and a bow and arrow, which leads me to believe, and you also, that it's our Valentine's Day episode.
So exciting. We are huge lovers of Valentine's Day. I think Lexi takes the cake for loving it just a little bit more. It is her self-proclaimed favorite holiday. So before we get into our viewer/listener submitted questions, I do want to ask you, Lexi. Now, this is my submitted question. I'm catching you on the spot here. So we're gonna be a completely unfiltered answer from Miss Lexi. Lexi, why is Valentine's Day your favorite holiday?
That is such a good question. That's how I start every interview. You're getting interviewed at a job and they're like, they ask you a question off the fly and you're like, that is such a good question. I've been wanting to answer that my whole life, actually. I would say that Valentine's Day is one of my favorite holidays because it's close to my birthday, which is the greatest day in American history. But other than just that, I think that pink is really cool. I love eating chocolate and getting little gifts and just the whole vibe of like showing how much you love somebody. And I am a capitalist pig when it comes to Valentine's Day. I will buy card. I will send you a treat. And I think Valentine Day grams are so cute and fun and like I just love it. Love is love. So that's why I personally love it, Andy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I do miss, in school when you would pass out like the Valentine's Day grams or whatever they called it. Like that was so iconic and like you were hoping your crush sent you one or like your bestie sent you one. Those were the days. Am I right, guys? And if you didn't do that, I'm super sorry for y'all. But I want to say again, just one more note before we dive in. I don't know about you, Lexi, but I was really, really happy with how many questions we got and just the content of the questions. These are not only the everyday questions that we all struggle with, but some really fascinating questions that made me think about some topics that had just never crossed my mind. So, thank you guys so, so much for all your submissions. We have some really, really great questions in store that I think will make for a really great episode.
I totally agree. And I also couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you guys so much for interacting and submitting questions. And honestly, although these are anonymous, like I don't know, you guys submitted some really good thought-provoking questions, and we're so excited to answer them to the best of our ability as experts.
We are honored to be trusted as your quote unquote love experts. Huge asterisks there, but I think we should dive in. Lexi, do you want to dive in?
Okay, let's dive in. Okay, so the first question we got submitted is, do you think once in a lifetime on fire soulmates really exist, or does it settle into something more ordinary?
This is a really great question. And I was really reflecting on it, and it just really got me thinking. So I want to say that I don't think this is an or situation. I think this can be an and situation, and that it can be both, right? We can have those, kind of on fire soulmate loves and also those more comfortable loves. And I think that they can ebb and flow. I think one can evolve into the other. So I don't think it's an or. I want to ask you a question, viewer. Is there only one person on this earth who can make us feel that soulmate kind of love? As much as we maybe want to believe, in my view, to be completely realistic, probably not. But I don't think that takes away the magic of the idea of a soulmate, right? I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who would agree that they felt true love in their definition more than once. They've, maybe had multiple soulmates or just different versions of soulmates. I think that the beauty is choosing your soulmate every day. Choosing your partner to be your soulmate every day. I feel like love becomes such a hardwired practice that the concept of ever not being by a person's side becomes totally foreign to us. And in that, you create that soulmate bond where, like I said, the idea of not being with that person is something that is so alien to you because you guys have grown to be soulmates. You guys pick each other as soulmates. And I also think that the kind of ordinary, comfortable love can be just as special and just as exciting as the on fire soulmate love. And I think it varies day to day. Sometimes you wake up and you feel like an old married couple that have been together for 40 years. Then sometimes you wake up and you feel like, early 20s. I don't want to say teenagers because that's weird, but what I'm saying? Like the early 20s, like excitement of your first romance. And, it can vary day to day. And I also think that being so comfortable with someone, they feel like your soulmate is, such a gift, and being able to be totally yourself with someone is what I would consider a soulmate. So hopefully that answered your question. Lexi, I would love to hear your perspective on this.
I would agree with what you said. I think another thing I wanted to add to it is that I don't necessarily think that it doesn't exist, but I don't think that love is meant to stay on fire forever. Because I think that love can change and it evolves, and I also think that think about a fire. Fires can go on and they rage, and sometimes they literally burn everything down. And so I don't necessarily think that like having an on fire love is something that like everyone needs to strive for or is even like practical in a way. I think, like you said, I think love can evolve into something that's not just ordinary, right? But it's like more sacred. It's more choosing your partner. It's more like an everyday thing, and it definitely evolves. I don't think soulmates disappear. I think your love can evolve. And I also agree with you. I don't necessarily think that one person is totally destined for this one, this, that, the other. Because I do think that people can have multiple soulmates. Like, what is a soulmate at the end of the day? I consider some of my family members like soul ties and people that have been throughout all iterations of my life. But I don't necessarily think that there's just one verse one, if that makes sense. And I also think that, like, with fire burning love, it can turn into something like, a kindling, right? A warmer connection, more steady, more healthy. But I do believe that you do have soulmates in a way, but I don't necessarily think that it has to be like this on fire love burning because love evolves, it's change, it's all of those things.
100%. I mean, I feel like we're super in alignment with that. And I think it's also like maybe more healthier way to approach dating and relationships and to not put all this pressure on one person to be your everything. I resonate with you, what you said. Like, I have friends that I feel like are my soul ties, my family. Like, there's different versions, but 100%. This gives us a good segue into our next question, which is a very kind of existential question. And we love those here. The question, that has been asked since the dawn of time, will I find love?
Okay, that is the age-old question, isn't it? And my answer is yes, but it may not be in the way that you're expecting it or the timeline that you are putting on yourself. Love is not something that you can, I think, control a lot of the times. I know it's cliche to say in some ways, but I also think that love finds you when you're ready. And I also really, really believe this. I think love will find you when you're living your life to the fullest, not halfway waiting for love to like walk in the door and save you from your life. I think living your life to the best way you can and filling your own cup is a really good way for you to find love, whether that's self love, whether that's familial love, friendship love, but loving yourself and filling your own cup and living your life, truly, truly living your life. I think love will find you. But I definitely do think that love is out there and you will find love. I also think it's like if you want it, you got to go out and get it.
Just to piggyback off what Lexi said, like, it's the English major in me that appreciates even the phrasing of the question, like, will I find love, not will love find me? So it shows that even, what you speak is your reality. And when you ask these questions, you already are aware that, like, you kind of, not are in charge of your destiny because that's a whole other conversation, but like you are the driver of your love boat, kind of call back to a previous episode of ours. Like, you are the one who has a role in making it happen. And I truly believe that humans are hardwired for connection. So I feel like it'd be really, really, really difficult to find one person out there like who hasn't experienced love in some form. Now, will you get married and live your happily ever after if that's what you're wanting? I don't know. I feel like that's a question only you can answer, and who knows if you can even answer it. Some of us don't know, but it's like one of those things where I feel like you'd have to really actively avoid it to not feel love in any aspect of your life. So, yes, to make a long answer short, yes, you're going to find love. Manifest it, girl, or gay, or they.
It's funny, I'll just give a little anecdote. Me and my sister, this was maybe 10, 15 years ago. We were watching Doctor Who, and there was one episode where we see this couple and they're like a very unconventional couple, is the best way I can put it. And we used to have this phrase like anytime we'd feel like, oh, are we ever gonna find love? Like we're so lonely, whatever. And then we look at each other and we go, well, Sophie found Craig. And if Craig got Sophie. So Abby, if you're out there listening, if Sophie got Craig and Craig got Sophie. Another thing that our listeners wanted to know about were the stages of love and are there rules or timelines to love stages? And I would love to take your perspective and your expertise on this, Andy.
I'm going to call back to Dr. Sandra Longislog's interview for episode 2 because I feel like she touched on this a little bit. She kind of differentiated between, the honeymoon phase and then the more companion, kind of long term relationship type of love. So, yes, I think that there are definitely stages of love. And I kind of dug into the science a little bit. And according to anthropology professor Helen Fisher, our goat, there are 3 stages of falling in love. So, in each stage, there's also a different set of brain chemicals that kind of run the show. So, the 3 stages are lust, attraction, and attachment. So, when you're in the stage of lust, you feel physically attracted to that person, you're very drawn to the object of your affection. Lust is primarily driven by the hormones testosterone in men and estrogen in women. Next is attraction, where you begin to obsess about your lover and crave their presence. These feelings are created by 3 chemicals. Norepinephrine, I probably totally botched that. Sorry to all my norepinephrine heads. Norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. Hey, I got the last 2. I know I pronounced those last 2 correct. Finally is attachment. So that's where obviously the more lasting commitment and comfortability comes in. After about 4 years in a relationship, dopamine decreases, but if the relationship is going well, if things are healthy, etc., it gets replaced by the hormones oxytocin and vasopressin, which create the desire to bond, affiliate with and nurture your partner. So that was kind of the more scientific aspect. Lexi, that was a lot of stemming, a lot of scientific kind of, jargon. Can you kind of speak more to that, if you will?
Absolutely. So let's try to put this in a little bit more layman's terms, right? When I was doing some research, I also found what Andy was speaking about with Helen Fisher. She is the GOAT. And if you have a chance to read any of her books, she was really, really into love and kind of the way science is, just like Dr. Sandra was. So I, recommend anything that she's written, any TED Talks. She's the literal, like, she is the GOAT of it, if that makes sense. So when I was looking, I found 4 stages that are a little bit more what we'd be using in like colloquial terms. So, like infatuation or limerence, right? That's the chemistry, the obsession, the fantasy of it. Then you have reality and differentiation, which can be like the seeing flaws in your partner and the power struggles that you have within the relationship. After that stage, you can hit stability and attachment, right? Which is what you spoke about earlier. So that's trust, routines, and safety. And then finally, you have deep commitment and choice, right? And that's another really big thing. It's all a choice. It's a choice to love somebody, it's a choice to leave somebody, it's a choice to love yourself, it's a choice to find love, to put yourself out there, etc. So choosing each other repeatedly. So many relationships actually don't make it past stage 2, not because they're failed, but because they were meant to teach and not to stay, if that makes sense. Because once you see flaws and you have power struggle, sometimes it's really hard to get over that. And so when you hit stage 3 and 4, that's when you have like a long-term committed relationship from the research that I looked into.
So, yes to everything you said. When I was also researching kind of in terms of the more very kind of long-term relationships, in terms of predictors of divorce in long-term couples who are married, one researcher also spoke about, the 7-year itch of like being together for 7 years. Like, you kind of look at this person and think like, is this everything? Is this what I want, etc. And then they also spoke about the 20-year mark because for people who get married and have kids, that is kind of when the kids leave the nest and they're back to just their partnership and they're kind of like, okay, now what? It's a different phase of relationship. So in terms of long term, those are kind of the markers. But again, it varies relationship by relationship. Okay, now we've covered the science. We're gonna go a little lighthearted. I have another kind of existential question for you, Lexi, and you're the expert on this. So, how does one acquire bitches?
I am the expert on this particular question. So I would say one acquires bitches by confidence, self awareness, emotional intelligence, and honesty. Okay, mind your business and live your life. But at the end of the day, bitches are attracted to people who are choosing themselves. So choose yourself, live your life, and the bitches will come a flocking.
No notes. Perfect.
Okay, so I think this is a perfect question for you in particular because why do we feel cute aggression towards pets? And honestly, I would say squishmallows.
So, this is a great question for all the animal lovers out there, something I've thought about as well. So, when I dug into it, scientists actually think that is a way we cope with our intense positive emotions. It's like a mechanism to manage the overload of these feelings that we get when we interact with something too cute for us to handle. Like, who remembers 2012, like, "It's so fluffy, I'm gonna die." Like, that was everywhere. The minions were everywhere. Like, that is literally cute aggression in a nutshell. So that was from the associate professor, Lisa A. Williams. She's a social psychologist from UNSW Science. On a personal note, I have dogs. I'm a dog lover, and I looked into why, when I come home or my dogs are super excited, they pick up toys and, like, circle me like a shark, and I was like, "What is going on?" So actually animals do it too, which is really interesting. And I think there's a parallel there of so for dogs or maybe cats do it, I don't know, but cats are more, they got their kind of shit together. But dogs, when they're so excited, they're so happy, they're so whatever, they pick up the toy as like a displacement behavior because they don't know where to put all of these emotions. So I think it's almost like a similar thing like when we feel really intense emotions, we just want to like strangle them or like, be like, "Oh my god, I love you so much." And dogs, they're like, "Oh my god, I have these intense emotions, like, I need to pick up a toy girl and, like, walk it off?" So that was kind of my take on it.
I think it's your nervous system, like, dealing with the overwhelming love feeling, and it's just, like, trying to balance you out, and your brain goes, like, too much, too fast, and so you release this, like, burst of energy, and that's what you were saying, so yes, absolutely, that's what cute aggression is, confirmed by us.
So that was a lot of yapping on our end. This next question is gonna be short and sweet. How would you describe the feeling of being in love in one word? Lexi, your one word.
Expansive.
Shoot, that's a good one. Mine, belonging. We're not expanding on that. Hers is expansive. We're not expanding on that. Next question. Do you think love in the afterlife is like the movie Eternity, where you have to pick who you spend your afterlife with?
That's a good question. Whoever asked that question, okay, T. I don't think that love is limited there like it is here. From all the accounts of near death experiences that we've kind of looked at, love feels like collective and honestly, the word that I describe expansive and infinite, right? So you don't lose anyone anymore. You recognize everyone. So romantic love might exist, but it's no longer exclusive or scarce. And another thing is like the afterlife is so different from everybody. So it's kind of like I don't have actually like a solid answer that is like the truth. All I can go off of is like kind of what I've learned and what I've experienced thus far in my own life. But I really do think that, it's not scarce. It's overwhelming. It's abundant. So it's not like it is here, in my opinion.
I love that answer. You are our NDE queen, so I let you take the lead on that one. Me, I concur. I concur.
You hear that, boys? She concurs. Okay, I have a question for you, Andy. And this is a question that obviously I hope for not 100 years you have to deal with this. And I hope that everyone listening, 100 years until anybody has to deal with this. But what do you think might be the hardest part for a grieving spouse while falling in love again?
So, as you said, I haven't, gone through this myself, thankfully. I don't really have anyone close to me that has gone through this, but obviously it happens. And, there are a lot of men, women, everything in between who share online, kind of what it's like to move through this grief. So, I'm just going to talk kind of from those perspectives that I've heard. But a lot of times they bring up, the guilt. It's not necessarily the guilt of moving on per se, although I'm sure that is, a component, but it's kind of the guilt that we talked about, like our episode with David on, feeling good things after immense tragedy, feeling joy and grief at the same time. And all I can say, again, I haven't gone through this, so I can't speak on it, but I'm sure it must be incredibly complex to deal with the loss of, maybe who you thought you were going to spend your whole life with, or maybe who you were who you had realized, like, wasn't your person and, they just happened to pass away, and that's, adds another layer of complexity. So I think it's that. I think it's the joy and the grief coexisting.
I agree with you. From the research that I've done and what I've looked, it's gonna be the guilt, and I also think, like you said in our episode with David, he touched on it too. It's not just the guilt of, like, moving on necessarily, although I'm sure that's part of it. It's also about the guilt of, like, just because you're loving again, it doesn't erase that grief that you've had or that person, and just because maybe you do get married again, it doesn't take away from your first love or the love that you had. I think it's interesting because I feel like there's a sense of betrayal, but I also think that it's so personal and complex, and like you said, neither one of us have experienced this, and even truthfully, like, people close to me really haven't experienced this yet, but that's what we found online, so hopefully that answered your question, viewer. And then another question I wanted to ask for our married lady is, do humans mate for life, and are we wired for monogamy?
Good question. So, I did some research. Janine Kalia Stamatakis, who is an instructor at several colleges in the San Francisco Bay Area, responds. One popular theory suggests that the brain is wired to seek out as many partners as possible, a behavior observed in nature. So, chimpanzees, for example, live in promiscuous social groups where males copulate with many females and vice versa. But obviously, we know there are several species of animals that mate for life. Instead of living in a pack like coyotes or wolves, for example, red foxes form a monogamous pair who share their parental and hunting duties equally and remain a unit until death, putting a new meaning on till death do us part, literally. So, a lot of researchers think that for humans, monogamy is not something that's in our biology. According to evolutionary psychologist David M. Buss of UT at Austin, humans are, in general, innately inclined towards non monogamy. But he argues promiscuity is not a universal phenomenon, and lifelong relationships can and do work for many people, obviously. So, yes and no. I think that biologically, maybe not, but sociologically, I feel like I just made that word up. Sociologically, obviously we are in, the West in America, we are raised in a monogamous society for the most part. And, I think there is something to say that even if we are sometimes biologically leaning towards non-monogamy, sometimes it's even more special when we choose monogamy, if that's how we choose to live our lives. I think that there's something to be said that, that can be even more special when we're going maybe against our biological instinct or whatever. So I think there's different answers to the question, and I think it depends on who you ask and by what standards they are judging by, if it's biology, if it's sociology, if it's psychologically, I'm sure there's a different answer. The answer is there are many different answers and every answer is valid. How about that?
That is not only beautiful, but poetic in a way.
Okay, speaking of, poetic and kind of really pushing the boundaries and really, really thinking, a viewer asked us something really interesting. If love has no conditions, aka unconditional love, then where do boundaries fit into relationships without becoming contradictions?
I think that unconditional love doesn't mean love with unconditional access, right? You can love somebody endlessly and still say, this behavior is not appropriate, or set a boundary in a way. So I don't necessarily think that unconditional love doesn't mean that you can't have conditional access to love.
I think that really is the essence of the answer to the question. I mean, I think this is a question that requires a lot of nuance, right? Like, when we say unconditional love, a lot of times we do mean it conditionally in extremes, right? So, as in, if you intentionally murder my whole family, I'll probably be more likely to break up with you than not, right? In most instances for most people. But then there's also the question of, since love is an emotion, is it just that easy to get rid of overnight, right? So, Dr. Sandra talked about this in our interview with her. She shared with us that there are practices to both increase and decrease our feelings of love. So, it is kind of something we can control, but to a certain extent. So, let's say that, God forbid, your partner does do something in your eyes that is unforgivable. Do you stop loving them right away? Probably it doesn't disappear overnight. I mean, feelings can be hard to get rid of. So, I think in that way, yes, maybe love is unconditional because we don't just stop loving someone one second to the next. But I also don't think that relationships have to be unconditional. I think that a lot of relationships have a lot of conditions, and I think that's good. I think it's a positive thing. So, this viewer also asked a question on the flip side, which I really think is interesting. So, Lexi, can you tell us, is conditional love actually more ethical because it requires responsibility and accountability?
That is a good question, and I think that it's not black and white, but conditional love can be ethical or even sometimes more ethical because I think that when you say unconditional love, I think that there's a lack of accountability sometimes, right? And this isn't a monolith, right? By any means, but I do think that having conditional love can be ethical in the fact that like you have accountability and you can say like I care enough for you to expect like responsibility from this person other than just, like, unconditional love of, like, you could do anything and I would still love you. I don't necessarily think that the 2 are divorced in any way. I think they go hand in hand, and I don't really like the black and white thinking of, like, is it ethical versus non-ethical? But I do think that there is responsibility when it comes to conditional love, but I also think you can implement that in unconditional love because at the end of the day, like, what is conditional love?
I think every couple has, like, their own balance of, like, forgiveness versus understanding versus, like, boundaries versus etcetera. So I think yes and no, right? Love can be conditional and unconditional and a mixture of kind of whatever. There's no this side or this side.
Totally agreed. And I have another question from a viewer. So, what does a breakup do to the body?
Good question. So, when we think of breakups, we think obviously emotional and mental ramifications, right? But does it live in the body? Does heartbreak live in the body? And there's been some research on this. So, Dr. Nikki Stamp, she's the author of Can You Die of a Broken Heart? Really good name for a book, by the way. But she's actually a heart surgeon. So, she said there are two main factors contributing to heartbreak's effect on the body. So the first factor is physical, as we may feel really high levels of stress, right? So during times of emotional upheaval, our brain set off into a cascade of physical responses that can impact our physical health. We see changes in our heart rate and blood pressure, which are really interesting. Researcher Ethan Cross kind of expands on that, and he actually found that powerfully inducing feelings of social rejection, example, a breakup, activate regions of the brain that are actually involved in physical pain sensations, which are rarely activated in neuroimaging studies of emotion, meaning that, they don't see this a lot in other types of circumstances. It's really unique to heartbreak or other aspects of social rejection. So he continues, he says these findings are consistent with the idea that the experience of social rejection or social loss more generally may represent a distinct emotional experience that is uniquely associated with physical pain. To answer the question, yes, and I think the research backs it up. I think that especially traumatic breakups can also leave people with a sense of PTSD that can kind of make further intimacy with other people a little bit harder because it almost triggers those like fight or flight responses that your brain oftentimes has to physical, mental, emotional signs of pain. So that was kind of what I found in my research. And I definitely think so. I mean, I think emotions live in the body. I think a lot of therapy and therapists explore that with people. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that, when you are heartbroken, your body, feels that just as much, if not longer or less or whatever, than kind of your heart and mind do.
I would agree with you. And just to keep it brief, like you don't sleep, you're not eating properly, you're physically feeling ill. And I also think like if we take a look at Star Wars, right? Like I do think Padme died of a broken heart, and I'll just leave it at that. My next question is, do you believe in unrequited love, and is it still love if it's unrequited or one-sided?
I'm gonna be really curious on your perspective on this, Lexi. For me personally, I know that if I love someone, like it's because they love me back. And that sounds horrible, but I do think like a big part of relationship is like choosing that person, having that person choose you. Like you can only go so far with a one-sided relationship. So I do think we can still call it love because you can have feelings of love like Dr. Sandra explored for AI, for celebrities, for fictional characters. Like, yes, and I think that it's a different type of love. And I think for some people, it can only be so strong without it being reciprocated. And I think that there are other people who also thrive on unrequited love and like, they love crushing, they love kind of the safety of unrequited love. So I do think it's love. Is it a relationship? I don't know. For me, I would probably say no. I think relationships have to be two-sided, but I think it is its own thing. I think a crush is fun. I think it's fun to have unrequited love in healthy doses, maybe. Lexi, I would love to know your perspective.
First, I don't think a crush is unrequited love. I do think that there's a distinction. But I also think that yes, love doesn't require permission for it to exist. And unreciprocated love shouldn't be something that you live inside forever, right? I think it deserves to be honored and talked about. And then I think it deserves to also be released. But I do think that having a crush isn't necessarily like having unrequited love for someone. I feel like unrequited love is a heavier term, almost like limerence. Like, it's a very different feeling. But I do think that unrequited love at the end of the day is still love. And it deserved to be treated as love, but then also released.
Yeah, crushes are like the tiniest subset underneath like this broad category. Like I think it's a spectrum, crushes here and like an unrequited like crazy not crazy because I don't want to say crazy, but you know what I'm saying? Like I think it's a spectrum and it makes me think of like the lady who was in love with her therapist. Like, girl, that was not good. That was not healthy. Would we say that
Kendra,
that's good? Miss Kendra, would we say that's a healthy relationship? Probably not. So that kind of leads me into my next question, which is can types of love be substituted for one another? So if you go through a breakup, is leaning on your friends with platonic love the same as leaning on your partner when it comes to romantic love?
I do not think that platonic love can substitute romantic love. It does not replace it, but it can support you through the loss of a breakup, right? Different levels of nourishment from different parts of your life, for example, familiar love, friendship love, loving food, loving a movie, like those things help you, but they're not a replacement. So one's not lesser than the other, which is an important distinction. It's just different. I don't think platonic love is more important or less important than romantic love. They're certainly not substitute, just like when you are, paying online for something, or if you're like doing DoorDash or something, it's like, what's your replacement item? It's never going to be the same item. It's like, I wanted these taquitos and you don't have them. And now I'm pissed. I have to get a different brand, but it's not the same, right? It's different. It'll satisfy you in other ways, but it's not a one for one.
I would agree, and it, like, brings me back to, obviously our episode on grief with David and how it could be grief, grieving a person, grieving a relationship, like, that grief is kind of, love with nowhere to go. I do think that in a healthy way, you can maybe channel those feelings of love with nowhere to go into, like you said, like, loving your friends, spending time with your friends, loving your family, spending time with your family, but obviously it's gonna look different than if you're losing a romantic partner. So I don't think it's the same kind of love, but I do think, like Dr. Sandra said, like love can be transformed if we work on it. It's like an exercise of, I'm feeling these big emotions, kind of going back to like the cuteness aggression, like in a different way. Like I'm feeling these really big emotions, like they need somewhere to go. And I think you can have a healthy outlet and I think you can, channel that into a hobby or friends, family, whatever it may be, where you spend your time, but it's going to look different at the end of the day.
And I guess the last couple questions we have here from our beautiful viewers is what does love mean to you and how has the podcast changed your view on love?
I think that's such a fun question. This podcast has changed my mind on so many different things like death, spirituality, the next realm, near death experiences. And now we get to, this season kind of change our own minds on love or broaden our horizons, I would say. I don't know if it changed my mind. I definitely think it broadened my horizons. We've heard so many wonderful perspectives and we still have some in store. So stay tuned. But, I think hearing the other way that people think about love in every sense of the word, the loss of love, the scientific aspect of love, the spiritual aspect of love, I think it's been a really healthy practice for me personally. I think it's so easy to like get wrapped up in our own narrative and experience of like love and life and death. And, that's everything we explore on the podcast is opening our minds up to other people's experiences, honestly, both positive and negative. So I think that in doing this podcast, it's helped me understand, first of all, that we are a lot more in control of our feelings of love than we may think. I'll leave it at that. I think that that kind of really sums up my experience with the podcast. And maybe no two people experience love the same, but that's what makes it so fun and exciting.
Yeah, I think I'll keep mine a little bit more simple and just the fact that We know some about love, but we don't know a lot, and I think that, like you said, everything is so subjective and so personal that I think it's just interesting that we may think we know a lot about love, but we really don't know a whole lot about love.
It's like love and death, like the 2 most or, like, least unexplored, like, kind of realms of the world.
It's hard to study.
'Cause it is, as we've seen. So, this is our final question. I think it's a really great one to end on. Lexi, do you have any advice for people who want to fall in love, but it just hasn't found them yet?
I do, and everyone come close, and I'm gonna kiss you on the forehead when I say this. Stop treating love like a destination and start treating your life like the point. Love does not arrive when you're waiting, it arrives when you're becoming, okay? So your life, the life that you're living right now and filling your own cup is gonna be the most important thing if you're waiting for love and you just have not found it yet, because it's like the old cliche of, like, it'll find you when you're not even looking, but I think the more important thing to get from that is that it'll find you when you're feeling yourself and you're the happiest and you're living your life to the fullest potential that it can be lived.
My advice would be embrace the fear. Obviously, not the fear of like going on a date with a man and he kills you. Like, be safe in your dating practices, share your locations with your friends. But on a not so extreme perspective, I think what holds a lot of people back is like fear, either fear of rejection, fear of like intimacy, fear of opening themselves up to someone, to getting hurt, whatever it may be. We all have our own issues, which respect. But, I think about how many couples loathe the more mundane and they want that fear. Like they want the fear back. They want the excitement back, the unknown back. Like I feel like there's so many people that long for like the opposite of like getting to know someone. Will they like me? Will they hurt me? Whatever. It's like that rush you get. And, would say as uncomfortable as it is, like go on that date, send that DM, walk up to that cutie at the bar. Also live your life. And if that's not your priority, that's not your priority. Like what Lexi said, I fully agree with that. But if it's something you really, really want and really want to prioritize, like love is an action. You practice kind of these things and practice being afraid. And I think it can be so tough. Nobody said love is easy, but I think can also be so worth it. Not just because of the partnership, but like you grow and you learn. And even if it's a quote unquote failed relationship, I think there's always something new to learn about yourself, to learn about how you want to be loved, how you love, etc. I think love lost is never love wasted. Let's say that.
I agree, and I always say this, and I tell my little sister this a lot. I'm like, "If you want it, you have to go and get it." So, like you said, send the DM. If you find someone attractive, be like, "Hey, I actually think you're really cool. We should hang out sometime." I think you have to put yourself out there in order to receive. You also receive the love that you think that you get, but I also think living your life, like you said, just, like, being as open and honest, and this is another thing I live by. It's like, as long as you're being honest to yourself, you'll never be wrong. Even if you do something wrong, as long as you're honest with yourself, like, you are never going to be wrong. Love is not a roadmap. Love is not something that you can put in a computer, right? We've learned that this season, if nothing else. So trust yourself, be honest to yourself, and just be open to it. And with that, guys, your questions hopefully have been answered, I guess, at least the best to our ability. Andy, anything else you want to say to our BLBers?
I want to say we love you, BLBers. We talk so much about love. We want to say we love you guys. Thank you so, so much for participating in this episode. Let us know if you like this format. Who knows? Maybe there will be a future Q&A or something fun. But this was really fun for me. I think it was fun for Lexi. And as always, live life beyond.